Okay, alright. Okay, alright, now it's working. Alright, now it should be working. Hello! Hello, everybody. Can you hear and see me now? Yes, okay, good. It looks like it's working. Is the audio too loud? Not loud enough? Let me know. So the mistake was on my end. I forgot to press go live in the on my YouTube back end. Okay. Is the mic too loud for people? Alright, hello there, everybody. Hello. Alright, things seem to be working now. Alright, so audio good. Okay. Alright, fantastic. So, if everything's alright, alright, let's have a little, we can take a few questions and answers before we start the feature presentation. And yes, Shenparte, I did see your question about Monsieur Z. And we should debunk him in this video. Oh, well, I don't know if I will be the one to do it. If I do, I'll probably do it like on Twitch or something at the moment. But at the moment, I've got a very specific plan. I might do it, but I try to avoid YouTuber drama, even if it's like with someone like Monsieur Z, who has been rejected by the history community. So, alright, so I guess before we get started, are there any questions people have before we start the video? Let's see, are you going to do a supercut of your Holodomor video? I'd love for it for sharing purposes. Well, for the Holodomor video, I mean, I already have my supercut of them. All 3 parts were already published as a single video back in July. You know, if you look up Conspiracy of Silence, you'll find one that's like 2.5 hours, and that's mine. And let's see, Shenparte, what is your take on Ukraine? Well, well, my take on Ukraine has been for the last better part of a week now. I have been sharing a meme I made to reply to everyone calling, Ukraine a Nazi state. It's a Simpsons meme, the guy tapping the sign on the bus, don't make me tap the sign. And the sign says, Ukrainian fascist is literal Stalinist propaganda meant to cover up a Soviet genocide. Let's see. Oh, some people can't find the video? That's odd. It should be quite easy to find. Let's see. I know I can pull it up fairly quick. I'll share it in the chat for those of you who, for some reason, haven't seen the supercut. I share it a lot on I share it quite frequently on Twitter, especially recently because of, the whole Russian invasion thing. Yeah, because of the whole Russian invasion thing, it gets shared quite frequently. So for those of you who have not seen the supercut of my Holodomor series, here it is in the chat. You can find it. Let's see. So yeah, Shenporte, will Putin use nuclear weapons if worse comes? I don't think so. I don't think he will use nuclear weapons. So, yeah, it's like, here's the thing. It's weird. The status of nuclear weapons in the modern day is kind of weird because it's this thing where it guarantees you won't be invaded by another country, especially one with nuclear weapons, and that's kind of the biggest reason to have them. And we have not had any kind of armed conflict between nuclear powers. That's one of the reasons why we haven't gotten involved in Ukraine. It's one of many reasons why, but it's one of them is that we just don't want to risk nuclear war. It's like you only get one shot at it. All right. So yeah, do you think this will be World War III? The fourth turning theory, but because of the shit. Okay, well, I don't think this will be World War III because we're not going to declare. The United States isn't going to declare war on Russia. No, yeah, I do not see that happening. So I see the current situation in Europe and in Ukraine a bit differently. Like everyone's wanting to make like World War II analogies, and I prefer more the 1930s type analogy that isn't World War II. Like if I were to equate the modern world, like the 2020s right now, to the 1930s, China is Germany, and Russia is either like imperialist Japan, or maybe even like Mussolini's Italy, and so I've been equating Russia's invasion of Ukraine to being more like Italy's invasion of Ethiopia or Japan's invasion of Manchuria. Or perhaps more accurately, Japan's invasion of China, because it was Japan's invasion of the rest of China that actually triggered like international sanctions, rather than his initial invasion of Manchuria, which had a less robust response to it. So, yeah, that's my World War III thoughts. See, Apollo, do you think the sanctions and banning some SWIFT transactions will actually make a difference? It'll make a difference in how the populace of Russia feels. And so it's going to be a question of, can we cause enough discomfort to the people of Russia for them to demand some kind of change or threaten some kind of popular revolution? And that's hard to tell. Russia has a long history of not falling to revolution, but they've fallen to it a couple times. So that's a tricky one. See, Eglom123, what is your thought on the Nebula streaming platform? Second, any plans to try to widely distribute your Oscar-worthy documentary in any wide capacity for educating the general population? Well, YouTube is the plan to distribute it to the wider population. And Nebula, I mean, it's all right. It's got some, hiccups, especially if you're using it like on the Roku app is a little buggy, but it's all right for the most part. It's like if you really like that particular set of content creators, it is definitely a very worthwhile app. I do have the service, but that's most because I subscribed to a Curiosity stream through I think the Great War channels is promotion of it at some point, and so I just coincidentally have it. Let's see. All right, there's this thing with nukes. See, Renok, there's also the thing with nukes where I have to keep explaining to people we no longer have enough of them to actually end human life like in the 70s. I couldn't have told you that at the top of my head. I mean, maybe not. I don't know. Russia still has a shit ton, though they don't keep them in good condition. But then again, we are In fact, it's the out-of-date nature of the technology for handling nukes is kind of why they're a little safer than before, because like we don't want to fully digitize like our like operation of our nukes, because that makes them more hackable than they are now. So it's one of these things where like being outdated actually is a protection. Okay, that guy asks, okay, last on the Ukraine thing, do you think Ukraine might win? I mean, whether or not Ukraine wins or loses, they've lost. I mean, they have war on their soil, destroyed infrastructure, lost human lives. You know, it's like, even if they win, they're still, have suffered from war. So, it's not good for them either way. See, Barry Polak, how bad would things have to get in Russia for Putin to be overthrown? That's difficult to say, because on the one hand, people are thinking Putin is this all-powerful figure. On the other hand, Putin has quite a bit of like people he needs to keep in his orbit to stay in power. So I can't say. I don't know for certain. I know that's an unhelpful answer to a lot of people, but it's the only honest one I can give. Let's see. Cruz. So any thoughts on pineapple on pizza? Pineapple on pizza is fine. Meme over. Renaka. Oh, this may sound a little dumb, but have you considered doing a history of the ancient aliens conspiracy theory? I have not, but there are other videos that are more or less covering that kind of stuff. I think Alternate History Hub has something about it. As does Autun Shea, and I think maybe even Knowing Better has something about it. There's a lot of channels that have covered it, so I don't feel the need to do so myself, especially not right now. So, yeah. Didymus asks, could this be another Soviet-Finnish war? I don't think so. I think Russia right now is already biting off a little more than it can chew, which is why there are talks of possibly bringing in Belarus. So I don't think they'll go after Finland. And Finland, of course, is now thinking about joining NATO, which will definitely take Russia attacking it off the table. And that's the ultimate reason why Ukraine is going to be seeking NATO membership once Russia's gone. Of course, one of the reasons Ukraine and even the country of Georgia down in the Caucasus aren't part of NATO yet is because NATO has sort of an informal rule that they do not let countries in that have major territorial disputes. And because Ukraine and Georgia both have major territorial disputes going on, with Russia occupying Crimea, as well as now much larger portions of Ukraine, and also occupying South Ossetia and Abkhazia in Georgia, that means those two are not likely to get in anytime soon. Let's see. Shen Partey, what do you know about the Azov Battalion and what are they? I don't know too much. I know that they are my understanding is they are a kind of a paramilitary group that seems to, at the very least, be fans of Nazi big fans of Nazi iconography. I mean, I wouldn't doubt that there are, Nazi sympathetic people in Ukraine, though once again I find the idea of Eastern European Nazis to be kind of weird, mostly because the Nazis thought the Eastern Europeans, these Slavs and Poles and whatnot, were inferior. Like they were genetically inferior. Which is why I have a hard time fully embracing the idea of Ukrainian Nazis. There were Ukrainians who, back in World War II, fought with the Nazis, but of course that should be contextualized as, yeah, some of them fought with the Nazis because the Soviets already tried to genocide them, earlier. So the Ukrainians already knew where they stood with the Soviets. So it's like, well, we know these guys have already tried to kill us. How could it get any worse under the Germans? And so, although I don't condone allying with Nazis, I can at least empathize with them siding with the Nazis when given their history. So, yee. Mike McSimac, what kind of inflation problems do you think this war is going to cause? Well, it's at the moment, the biggest thing we're going to feel is energy prices. So, gasoline, electricity, all that kind of stuff. And the prices were already going up, especially like out here in California. We're already even in the Central Valley, which usually has lower gas prices than the rest of California, we're already in the mid $4 range. And so if we really do cut off if we cut off supplies from Russia, we are definitely going to see over $5 a gallon gas in California across the board. Some places already have that. See, Didymus, does this parallel the Soviet-Finnish War? Not quite. There are definitely some similarities, but I think it's a little too early to tell exactly what it is. So, so I can't say. I hope the ghost of Kiev is real. I want to believe. But, fog of war, we don't know how much is real and how much isn't. Let's see. All right. Oh, it looks like we got ourselves a super chat. Zalmi T. Thank you for the super chat, my friend. Number one fan. Well, thank you, Zalmi. Let's see. Devin Canada, could the Ukrainian Nazis be of German descent? Or maybe just copying parts of the ideology? That's most likely. I'm not going to talk too much about them. But all I know is that the Azov battalion, or whatever it's called, is only 2,000 or so guys tops in a country of 44 million. 2,000 guys running around with swastika banners does not a Nazi state make. And of course, calling modern Ukraine a Nazi state is utterly grotesque, especially considering, as I think we all realize now, if we've all been paying attention, Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is Jewish, and his father fought in the Red Army against Nazis. So, it's disgusting. And are the Nazis going to try, are the Azov battalion going to fight Russians? Yeah, probably, because if you look up the history of the Ukrainians in World War II, they fought everybody. They fought communists. They fought Nazis. They were just very much nationalists. Let's see. All right, I think we'll take a couple more questions, and then I think we'll get on with the feature presentation. Let's see. Le Furry. The Noob Gameplays Music has. As someone who's writing an article about Brazilian political songs since the imperial period, I'm looking forward to that live stream. Greetings from your fellow furry historian. You could have just said historian, I'm not a furry. Or whatever the context of this is supposed to be. Jeremy Norwood, isn't it? It isn't exactly like the oil corporations need any excuse to raise prices arbitrarily, though. Now is it, lol. Yeah, there's this idea that corporations just discovered greed during the pandemic. It's like, yeah, no, it's supply chain stuff. It's all that. Prices went up a lot during the Iraq War. They're going up now. Basically, they'll go up whenever a oil-producing country has political instability. That's the basics. All right, one last question. Barry Pollock. What lessons should Xi Jinping draw from Putin, Ukraine regarding Taiwan? Well, the first lesson is that the West, or at the very least the United States, isn't going to let this go without a fight. It's like we've given way more arms to the Ukrainians than I thought we would. And the Europeans are now all getting their act together. They're not willing to send manpower because, nobody wants World War III, because that's what would happen if you declare war on Russia. But they're sending tons of weapons and aid pretty much like just out in the open. They're not even doing it covertly. So, I will take one last question because we've got another super chat from Devin Canada. Is the Ukrainian president a dictator like Tulsi Gabbard said? No, he's not. He's not a perfect guy, I can't say I know too much about him, Obviously, I know the basics. He was a comedian. He played, he played the president of Ukraine in either a movie or TV show back in 2015. He's a flawed man running a flawed country, but I think Ukraine is trying to be a democracy. And this is the longest they've gone without having massive Russian interference in their internal affairs. From 2014 to just, this last week was the longest they went without massive interference, without basically Russians directly controlling their politicians. It's the longest they've gone. It's admirable, and I think we need to give them the chance for their democracy to thrive. So yeah, all right. Well, with those questions out of the way, let's start with the feature presentation. This is a anti-communist propaganda film put out by, I believe, or at least in association with the Department of the U.S. Navy, called Communist Society from 1956, and I think the Catholic Church was also involved in the production of this one. So, let us start.
Behind the Iron Curtain, a small group of men controls the lives of some 100 million human beings. From behind the Iron Curtain, the same small group threatens the peace and liberty of humanity. Why are they so? What is this communism which drives them on? This is the Catholic Hour. The Catholic Hour is produced by the National Council of Catholic Men in cooperation with the National Broadcasting Company and its affiliated stations. Today, the Catholic Hour presents the last in a series of 4 programs on communism entitled Communist Society. To tell the story of the communistic philosophy of life, here is the Reverend James J. McQuaid of the Society of Jesus and head of the Religion Department of John Carroll University in Cleveland, Ohio.
If you ever get a chance to take a course in geology, by all means do so. You'll find it a most interesting subject. It studies the nature of the earth and how it came to be what it is. The story is all there in a record of a series of layers of stone. Some of them are sandstone that has been made by the wind and the wave beating against the rocks of the earth. Some of them are limestone layers. And those are made by billions and billions of little shellfish who lived and died and left their shells behind them. Now, it took a long time of wind and wave and shellfish to build up some 30 miles of the stuff. This 30 miles of stuff is just like a many-layered cake. And in each layer, we find the remains of the various things that were on the earth when the layer was baked. In the top layer and on the surface, we find all the things that are in existence today: plants, fish, and birds, reptiles, animals, and men. It took about 52 million years to lay down this layer. But if you go under that to the one that's called the Mesozoic, which was laid about, 152 million years ago, we find plants and fish and birds and reptiles, but nothing else. And if you go down below that, you find a very thick layer. It's called the Paleozoic layer. That began to be laid down 574 million years ago. And there you find fish and birds and plants and elements, but no more reptiles. And down below here in the Proterozoic era, which began to be laid, it's almost impossible to imagine it, 1900 million years ago, we find plants and elements and nothing else. And below that, down in the Ozoic or non-life period, we find igneous rock, and that is all. Geology gives us the fact that every several hundred million years or so, a new form of life appeared on the earth. The question is, how did that come to be? What made it happen like that? Well, there are three great answers to that question. The most simple answer is, well, that's the way God created them. And you know, it is an interesting fact that Moses, when he wrote these first words of the Bible, got these things appearing on the earth in exactly the same order in which geology, which was only recently invented, has found them in the actual rocks of the earth. So that as somebody says, either Moses was inspired or he was a very good geologist. That theory is called the theory of special intervention, that God intervened in his creation from time to time and came up with something new. The second answer is that which Charles Darwin began to play around with. It's called the theory of biological evolution. According to this theory, these various forms of life developed from one another by reason of the interior forces adapting themselves to new circumstances as they changed from time to time. Well, on the bottom of the ocean floor, the little plants wiggled and waggled and wiggled and waggled until suddenly one wiggled free and began to swim, and you had fish. And then the fish discovered the surface, and he flipped and he flopped out of the water and into the water until one day he flipped, but he didn't flop. And so you had the bird flying through the air. And then the bird somehow or other fooled around with the water, and the fish fooled around with the land, until somehow or other they adapted across, and you had the reptiles on land and sea. Finally, one of the reptiles wandered off into the woods and kind of got cold and grew fur, and you had the animals. It sounds silly the way I put it, but it really isn't. In the first place, I have caricatured the theory. It's much more scientific than that. In the second place, there's no reason why God could not have created originally some original form and then have everything else develop from that as circumstances change. It's still just a theory. The scientists are working.
Okay, so this is my first time seeing this, so I don't preview all of these things before I show them to you guys. And I think I might know where he's going here. He's going to draw the Darwin connection to Karl Marx. You see, Karl Marx and Charles Darwin, were contemporaries of each other, and they did have at least some communications with each other. They were both living in England at the time, so yeah, it was the idea. And Marx credited, Charles Darwin's, Origins of the Species and his other writings on evolution with helping him, develop his own theory. This idea that communism isn't just a sociological phenomenon, but it is a scientific phenomenon. It's like this whole idea of you hear from some from Marxists and socialists that this idea that communism or Marxism is scientific, scientific socialism. Well, the scientific aspect of it was inspired by the writings of Charles Darwin. And so, if I had to guess, I think that's the route they're taking here when they're talking about evolution and Charles Darwin. They're going to connect that over to Karl Marx. Well, let's see if my prediction is correct here.
On it, we hope that they establish it one way or the other. But the third answer is the one we're interested in. The answer of the communist. Upon his answer, he is building the whole future of the race, and he is constructing the whole social order of humanity. The communist is the only one of the three who rules God completely out of the picture. He starts out with the idea that this material universe is all there is, there was, there ever will be. But it's getting better. In his theory, it's getting better by what he calls the law of conflict or struggle. According to this law, there's lots of struggle and struggle and struggle, and all of a sudden, there's a leap to a new form of life or a new form of existence. In his idea, in the beginning, there was stresses, strains, and tensions in the order of the material universe. There were explosions and conflicts, and these got worse and worse until suddenly there was some sort of a leap in nature, and little plants began to grow here and there about the earth. The plant world, in its turn, was filled with stresses, strains, and tensions. Millions of years went by until these stresses, strains, and tensions reached the breaking point. There was a leap in nature, and fish began for the first time to swim, and the birds to fly. And now there was more tension. Birds against birds, fish against fish, elements with elements. And that went on until there was another leap in nature, and the dinosaurs began to flounder around, and the snakes began to slither on the earth. It was the age of the reptiles. Then, of course, we did have more and more stresses brought into the world. And these stresses stressed, and these strains strained, and these tenses tensed, until there was a lot of breaking all about, a new leap of nature, and furry mammals began to wander in the jungle. Now, the greater the leap in nature, the greater the stresses, strains, and tensions. It was a great leap from the reptile to the animal, but nothing at all like the leap that had to be made in the next step of the process. Now we did have a stressful, strainful, tense-filled world. And all these grew and grew and grew until we had the next leap in nature, the leap to individual man. Individual man with the nature that we know him to have today, the individualist who has his own personal ideals and his own personal characteristics. And all that this man did was increase the tensions. Individual man. The man who looks out for himself and his own is inevitably, so says the communist, in conflict with other individualistic men who look out for themselves and their own. In fact, he says the history of the human race is nothing but the story of the growing clash between individualistic man and individualistic man. First of all, there was the clash of slavery, which yielded to the greater clash of feudalism and the still greater clash of capitalism. And this goes on and on, corporation against corporation, nation against nation, the proletariat against the capital, until the great day will come when these stresses, strains, and tensions will be so great that they will give birth to the new leap in nature and to collective man. Now, this collective man is going to be different, altogether different in nature from ourselves. He will have an altogether different mentality, and therefore the society...
Yeah, so that's more or less what I was getting at earlier. So Marx's ideas were heavily influenced by Charles Darwin, which Marx saw Darwin's work as sort of like the biological explanation, or like a biological equivalent of like the Hegelian method. You know, there's this idea that you have thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis. Well, that's basically Marx's whole idea. Marx's whole theory of, you know, the development of history is very Hegelian: thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And that's why he credited Charles Darwin with giving him sort of this scientific ideas, so he could say that, yes, you know, it's like, it's not just sociological. Communism is scientific. And so if this sort of, you know, struggle, thesis, antithesis, synthesis process created capitalism, and we know this kind of process is reflected in nature, then we know that the capitalists will eventually be overthrown or sort of done away with by some new ideology that'll bring us closer and closer to a end state, which be called communism. Raphael, who's speaking again? I actually don't know at the top of my head, but, you know, he's a Catholic priest. This is a show from something called the Catholic Hour. I think it was co-produced by like the Department of the U.S. Navy, and he's talking about communism, and he's connected sort of like Darwinian evolution to Marxist thought, which is an actual thing that happened historically speaking. You know, Karl Marx was influenced a lot, especially his later writings, by Charles Darwin. Jeffrey Riley, I minored in political science in college. It's not science. Science is physical reality. Well, once again, telling you that the reason I use the phrase scientific socialism is because that's what the socialists themselves use. They call it scientific socialism. And they used ideas from Darwin to show that our ideas, you know, our Hegelian ideas about man are reflected in biology and in nature, not just in our sociological frameworks. But yeah. All right, let's continue.
Society in which he lives will be an altogether different sort of thing than we are accustomed to live in. This new society will look not to the individual, but to the whole collectivity. The individual won't count. He won't be important. As a matter of fact, the individual himself will look not at all for his own good, but only for the good of others. In fact, his personality will be so fused with that of all the others that he will think the same, work the same, live the same, have the same as all others. Just as a lake trout will not leave its school of fish and walk down the beach on its tail, so neither will collective man wish to leave the lockstep life of the collectivity. It just will be against his very nature to do so. No, this collective man will be utterly happy in the thought that the collectivity is the all The individual is not important. He will have no trouble, as we would, in suppressing our personal tastes and private wishes. By reason of this leap in nature, he won't even have any personal tastes and private wishes. All he will even have is the common wishes of humanity and the common tastes of the collectivity. And so society will not exist for the individual. That is the way things are now in this very imperfectly developed stage of materialistic evolution. No, society, he will exist wholly and entirely for society. He will be secondary to everything and every consideration in society. And that will be the eternal place of the individual in communistic society. But what about the family in this new order? Oh, that's going to be altogether different too. Individual man, as we know him, has come to look upon the family as his own. He speaks of my wife, my children. The individualistic child speaks of my mother, my father, my brother, my sister. Now, in the mind of the communist, the only reason for that is that we live in a society that is dominated by the dollar sign. The father holds the means of livelihood, and therefore the wife must sell her exclusive services to the pocketbook of her husband.
I see. So he's getting into some stuff, not just Marx stuff, but also a lot of Engels here. So Engels wrote a lot of like even more sociological stuff than Marx did. And he had stuff about sort of, what the communist interpretation of the origins of the family and whatnot. And wrote a lot of weird things along with that. And the idea that part of the goal of communism would be to destroy the family by turning sort of like all of mankind into like the family structure. So yeah, it's I know a lot of the stuff sounds kind of weird, can sound kind of weird the way he's talking about it, but it actually does make you follow along with it when you're familiar with sort of the history of this stuff. And it's really fascinating. I recommend like Jonah Goldberg's second and highly underrated book, The Tyranny of Cliches. I think it's available. You can read it for free on like Internet Archive. It's really good if you get a chance to read it. In fact, if you have an Audible membership, it's included in the Audible membership for free. So I don't know, book recommendation in the middle of a communist propaganda. So let's keep going here.
And the children too are under the debasing necessity of rendering obedience for support. But when the next new leap to collective man takes place, then we shall have something altogether different. Human nature will change from being self-centered to being social-centered. And now, no man will even seek the exclusive companionship of any woman, nor will any woman ever seek the exclusive companionship of any particular man. Both will be free of the economic necessity of living together under contract. The contract of marriage goes. Oh, children will be born. Yes. But mothers will be different. Instead of bearing children for themselves as they do now, they will bear children for the community. And the community will take those children and educate them and train them for the collectivity. So goes the family. And as the family, so the state will pass away. When we look at the state, we see a many-sided thing. To us, the function of the state is in all various fields of human living. But to the communist, the one sole function of the state is to regulate the economy, to restrain the individual from seeking his advantage to the disadvantage of his fellow men. In our present society, the function of the state is to enforce justice, the principle of to each his own. That is because in this present order, the individualist tends to steal that which belongs to others. In this present order, the sole function of the state is to restrain the individual from creating scarcities through which he hopes to exploit his fellow men. Now, in this order, the communist readily agrees the state is necessary. But when the change to the collective man takes place, the whole picture will be different. Now you will have a human being whose sole passion and sole urge is to do the good for his fellow men, not for himself at all. And therefore, since this is going to be a change in nature, it'll be true all over the world, every place. And so, there will be no need to restrain the individualist from exploitation.
Yep, and this is another sort of a philosophical root of Marxism. So Marx also borrowed a lot from the French philosopher, his name, Rousseau, I think it is. Rousseau's idea of sort of man having a very malleable nature. And a lot of Marxism is based on this presumption that, man's human nature is not solid, it's not set in stone, but rather is malleable. We are, the human nature is very malleable, and therefore you can change man over time through like changes in societal institutions and whatnot. And so that's what a lot of this is sort of being built on, is this idea that, we'll change human nature to make man like purely altruistic, get rid of this idea of individual self. And that's kind of what he's getting into here. So, that's another little neat thing.
There will be no individualist to do the exploiting. In the same way, there will be no need to prevent people from stealing. There will be no reason to steal. Everyone will have all he wishes. There will be no individualists around to create scarcities. And therefore, in the communist ultimate ideal, there isn't going to be any democratic government, nor even any communist government. There isn't going to be any government at all. We're all going to live together, loving each other and doing for all and all for one. What a glorious mirage that is. So, family goes, the state goes. All this new skyline of the future is going to be a whole lot different from the skyline of today. Today we have the domes and towers of our city halls and courthouses. All of these will pass away. But above all, these steeples in our big cities and in all the little villages throughout the length and breadth of our land will pass away. For as the families, so and the state, so religion will leave the world. We look at religion, again we see a many-sided thing, and a lovely thing for many fields of human life and action. We look at the great religions of the world. We look at the Hindu religion, and we see the root and source of the great culture of India. We look at the Jewish religion, and we see the tradition of centuries of loyalty to a great ideal. We look at the Buddhist religion, and we see one of the grandest natural philosophies of living known to man. In the Christian religion, of course, we see the root and source of our whole civilization and culture. In the Mohammedan religion, the beauty of simple loyalty to a great ideal. And in the religion of Confucius, we see the history of one of the most respected civilizations in the world, the civilization of the great Chinese. But not the communist. To the communist, the one sole function of religion is to pacify the downtrodden victims of capitalistic oppression. To pacify them by offering them a future life where all will be well. Pie in the sky when you die, you know. By offering them a God, to give a God to an exploited man to help him bear in patience the pain of his exploitation. But after the new collective man emerges, there won't be any oppressed or downtrodden. There won't be any exploited to pacify, because there will be no individualists left to do the exploiting. There won't be any need of suggesting a future heaven, because heaven is already here. And so religion will have died of uselessness. But, says the communist, until it does die of uselessness, it will continue to pacify. It will continue to offer the hope of some other life in the future that will lessen the stresses, strains, and tensions of modern society, and so hold back the glorious day of that leap to the collective man. Now, it must not be allowed to do this. It must be destroyed in order to hasten this happy eventuality. Above all, it must not be allowed to be around to usher in the coming of this new collective man, to confuse him and make him worried about his new collective and self-sufficient society which he is forming. And therefore, by his very basic principles, the communist is dedicated wholeheartedly to war with every single form of religion known to man. Oh, there's no mystery about communism. It's all down there in Joe Stalin's little book, Dialectical and Historical Materialism. He who runs may read. There is no enigma in communist policy. They tell you very plainly. It's all a matter of fostering this materialistic evolution. They are, they always have, they all...
Okay, so somewhat contextualizing this or commentating on this bit is that there is a kind of a trend amongst a certain sort of like school of anti-communist thought, anti-communist activism and whatnot, that is definitely very theory focused. You know, it's like somehow like similar to how you come across various communists and socialists who are constantly going, you know, read theory. You know, that's their response to everything. It's like if you don't understand something or you don't agree with what they said, they just say, oh, you just need to read theory. Well, there is sort of a counterpoint to them amongst anti-communists, people who are also very obsessed with reading theory, and therefore sort of like assume that they act and communicate as though like every person who professes communism has read Marx or Lenin or even Stalin, which is kind of the big flaw about sort of like describing like political groups collectively, is that you're making a lot of presumptions about what you assume they all know or think. And that's one of the flaws that some anti-communist programs like this go for. Is that it's like, I mean, yes, he's making a lot of points that are in fact found in a lot of communist theory, your Marx, your Lenin, your Stalin, but he's kind of assuming too much from your everyday communist or everyday person who might be interested in communism, assuming that they've read theory when the vast majority haven't. You know, like the vast majority of self-professed Marxists have never read Das Kapital because Das Kapital is awful and you don't want to read it. Similar to how most self-professed Nazis have never read Mein Kampf because it's a terrible book and you don't want to read it. Similar to how most self-professed objectivists have never read Atlas Shrugged because it's not a very good story. You know, like Ayn Rand mostly focused on Ayn Rand wrote diatribes or speeches, philosophical diatribes, and then tried to construct a story around them. And that's more or less the story of Atlas Shrugged or any of her other narrative works. And that's kind of what's going on here. He's making kind of a lot of presumptions that you might be familiar with communist ideology or asserting more importance on theory than the real practice of communism actually has. So, all right, looks like we got a little bit more here, so let's finish this off.
Always will foster the stresses, strains, and tensions out of which will come the new collective man. And therefore their policy is going to be what it always has been, to enter every single field and phase of human living in order to create the stresses, strains, and tensions out of which will come the new society. In the political field, on the national and in the international level, party against party, nation against nation, East against the West, the democracy against the satellite. The more stresses and strains and tensions, the sooner will come the leap to the collective order. In economics, the motto is the same: struggle, struggle. Corporation against corporation, union against union, company against union, capitalist against proletariat. The sooner we get the stresses up to breaking point, the better. The benevolent, the good capitalist is the greatest enemy of communism. The oppressive, selfish capitalist, if there be any left, is its greatest friend. The communist holds the motto, not reform, but revolution. Reform only lessens the tensions and holds back the glorious leap to the future. In the same way in the field of religion. The Hindu must fight the Mohammedan. The Jew must fight the Arab. And oh, how the communist rejoices that individualist man has even broken down Christianity into warring sects and factions. The more of intolerance and bigotry, the better. Infiltrate the ministry. Develop the tensions, stresses, and strains out of which will come the glorious golden era of collective man. And in the social field as well, race must be pitted against race. Class must be opposed to class. The more of irrational fears and hatred, the better. Do not these irrational fears and hatreds beget stresses, strains, and tensions? And will not stresses, strains, and tensions hasten the leap to collective man? Why, even the mind of man itself is not to be spared this policy of disruption. Infiltrate the universities. Error is multiple, truth is only one. Truth unites men, error divides them. Preach the doctrine of multiple philosophies so that the sooner we can get this individualistic brain of man to break, the sooner we will have the glory of collective man. In every field it's the same. And so, we have a divided world. On the one side, the hammer and the sickle. On the other side, the flags of the free nations. On the one side, a small group of men dedicated to forcing the whole of humanity into the molds of a preconceived and unproved evolution. And on the other side, some 800 million groaning under the Red Terror, and the rest of humanity destined to be their victims. Our only hope of survival is to face these facts. Coexistence to a communist means nothing, and peace is impossible. You cannot coexist with one who is dedicated to your complete and utter destruction to make room for the collective man who will displace you.
Today, the Catholic Hour has presented the Reverend James J. McQuaid of the Society of Jesus and head of the Religion Department at John Carroll University, in the last of a series of 4 programs on the communist philosophy of life entitled Communist Society.
Gotta say, a quick comment about his set. It's like he's got this big elaborate set going from place to place, spinning things around. It kind of reminds me of a Glenn Beck set from back in the early 2010s. It very much reminds me of that. He would go to these things in his studio when he broke away, when he went independent from Fox. He created this big thing. It's this 3 or 4 sided chalkboard carousel that he could spin from side to side. And these other chalkboards with all these, arrows and things pointing to pictures and whatnot. So it kind of reminds me of that in a way. So, all right. So, what do people here have to think about this? I've been keeping a half eye on the chat while this has been going on, occasionally jumping in when I thought there was something needing responding to, but thoughts from the class? All right, yep, so people are responding to the Glenn Beck comment. Yeah, that was what I was thinking there. All right, some people are having debates over capitalism in the comments. I probably disagree with them, but yeah, I'm not gonna. So long as you're not denying the Holodomor, I'll let commies continue talking in the chat. It's let's see, Renok. The pastor seemed to confuse rhetoric and doctrine a lot. Well, it's just this. It's part of the nature of some anti-communists that they get very into communist theory. It's just kind of a way some of them have a go about it. I wish I could explain it a little better. But, yeah, it's just kind of the nature of some of them getting very esoteric about it in ways. I think that's the thing. I've been using the word esoteric to describe a lot of things more often now, and yes, it's very much like esoteric anti-communism in a way. It's anti-communism in a way that's not really practical. If you've ever read Ludwig von Mises or Friedrich Hayek, their anti-communisms are far more practical in terms of the real world. Let's see, Norwood. I've seen so many of these old black and white propaganda films in my time. So much History Channel as a kid. Yep. And it's a rabbit hole that goes deep. Ugly Weirdo only cost the last 10 minutes or so, but Pastor seemed pretty bloodthirsty. I wouldn't say bloodthirsty. No, this is just... Once again, I'm used to seeing this kind of stuff. I'm not Catholic or anything like that, but, it's it wasn't outside the realm of things I have heard before because I've read enough in this area that I can, I can follow along. Let's see. St. Orville seems like the average conservative Western Christian talking points: loss of traditional family, loss of Christianity, all religion, etc. Not very convincing. Well, here's the thing. The issue I think you're kind of missing here. It's not that will this happen, but is this what communists want? And that's kind of the diversity here. That's what sort of the split that's happening is, will basically, because there are, genuinely speaking, lots of communist theorists, your Marx, your Engels, your Lenin, your Stalin, they all talked about, to one extent or another, this idea of, the family structure and religion going away and actively wanting to get rid of them because they sort of they hamper the progress of communism. So they actively wanted to do these things. It's just a matter of how effective or realistic were those ideas of getting rid of them. And I think that's the thing. It's that you have this Catholic priest who's taking these goals, these self-professed goals of communist theoreticians very seriously. It's like, hey, the communists say they want to get rid of religion and the family. Well, I'm going to take them very seriously since those things are important to me. So it's just a matter of how important should you take your enemy's words of what they want to do. And sometimes you do need to take them really seriously, and other times you don't, Like when Osama bin Laden and other Islamists back in the 90s were talking about, wanting to declare war against the United States and the West. Well, that's something that should have been taken more seriously, but we didn't take it seriously. And then other times we take things seriously that we shouldn't have, and that's just kind of the reality of life and living in the world. And we don't always know what should have been taken seriously earlier until it's too late. Let's see. Let's see. All right. Well, I guess, all right, we're a little over an hour now, so I think I'm going to call it quits for this evening. So unless anyone has any more questions, anyone have any more questions before I decide to call it a night? We can do this again, hopefully in the not too distant future. See, is there a second film too? Unfortunately, not tonight. Some things have come about, but yeah, we won't be doing a second film tonight. I will try to do more than one next time. I don't know exactly when next time will be, but I'm going to try to do these a little more frequently. See, pan-monarchist action. Did you know Engels created a concept called Volkerbefallen, or whatever, Volkerbefallen, which essentially stated that certain ethnic groups were inherently reactionary. I can't say I have, but I'd be interested in looking into that. I might look into that later. See, Jeffrey Riley, we just need to love each other alone to live in our lives. Charlie Blucker, great history videos, thank you. What was the bird in the age of the first thing? Not sure. Ugly Weirdo, thanks for hosting. Well, thank you for watching. This live stream will be available at the very least until the next one happens. That's what I tend to do. Stated this in the comments earlier, but I have past live streams, but I don't usually leave them up forever. I usually leave a live stream up until I complete the next live stream, in which case then that live stream will stay up until I complete the next one. And all my past live streams are available to patrons over at patreon.com/casualhistorian. So if you're that interested in seeing them, you can find them there. Let's see. So yeah, Dr. Gazooks, when did they stop calling it Mohammedanism and start calling it Islam? I'm not sure. I've sort of wondered that myself. I'm not sure. I know you can still see them calling them Mohammedans as late as the 1960s in some books. So yeah, I can't say exactly when. Might look into that at some point. See, One Godless Monkey, would you say that postmodernism is their latest attempt at destroying those institutions? I don't know, man. Postmodernism, I have a hard time finding full agreeable definitions with that. It's one of those concepts that means a million different things depending on who you're talking to. So I don't go this whole of like I don't obsess over postmodernism like Jordan Peterson would. All right. The Mark Gell, you like Burton Folsom Jr.? Yeah, I like Burton Folsom Jr. I'm it's like I've read New Deal or Raw Deal, and FDR's Folly. I've read those. I haven't read his book on the robber barons. So, I can't speak to that one yet, but his other books were good. I assume that one will be good as well. And if I read his book on the robber barons, I'll probably end up making a video based around it, but I'll probably have to supplement it with additional things because Myth of the Robber Barons is a fairly thin book, so it'd have to be supplemented with other materials. So, thank you all for watching the stream, and I will have a video out, a regular, fully scripted and everything video, not this coming Saturday, but the Saturday after that. So, let's see, today's the 28th, so, I think Saturday the 13th, I should have a new video out, and it will be about, Vladimir Putin and modern Russia. So, until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.